Hello, everyone. I think we'll begin now. Thank you for joining us for our webcast today. Today, Joshua Ross is going to talk to us about success factors, what traditional business really needs to know about Web 2.0. And Josh is Vice President of O'Reilly in Practice. It's a new division that he can tell you more about. He's been consulting with businesses on digital strategy for well over a decade and has a deep background in online marketing and communications. And I've heard Josh give presentations a couple times, and every time he talks, I learn something new. And so I expect that we'll all get a lot out of today's webcast. He's going to talk for about 20-25 minutes, and then he's allowed plenty of time for questions. So if you have any questions about Web 2.0 or having an online presence or how Web 2.0 can help your business, do feel free to ask them.
Very quickly, I just want to give a trajectory for today's talk, hinted at in this kind of provocative title of what traditional business really needs to know about Web 2.0. What I want to do is just quickly set the table by talking about kind of the state of the union on the Internet and why it matters for traditional business to really engage on the Internet in a new way. And then I want to talk about a couple of fundamentals, new organizing principles, meaning how do successful online businesses represent a change in doing business as usual. And I also want to talk about new operating values, so the mindsets and operating values that enable successful companies to deliver on the Internet. And the reason I chose to talk about that is regardless of whether you're looking at an initiative to deploy a social network out or a private community to your customers, whether you're looking at a wiki internal or starting to blog or something else on the Internet, the success factors of these new organizing principles and operating values, I think, underlie any of those initiatives that you'll take on. So I want to start at that very broad level and drill in. So just really quickly as a piece of background, Catherine kind of already gave you my background, about 10 years in digital strategy and businesses everywhere from startups to Fortune 500, helping them kind of create and craft a presence online. And O'Reilly in Practice, as Catherine noted, is a newer division of O'Reilly that's really focused on helping traditional business leverage emerging trends and technologies. So by traditional business, I mean non-internet native businesses, so not Google, not Amazon, not Flickr. And while many of those companies defined a lot of the successful patterns that are the hallmark of Web 2.0, traditional business has a different set of issues to cope with when they approach creating or implementing a digital business strategy. They have different culture, definitely different organizing structures, which we're going to talk about a little bit in a moment. They have a different working profile, meaning the employees have different skill sets and behaviors and preferences than kind of these internet startups that are generally, comprise a lot of internet, what we call digital natives. So we really look at taking kind of O'Reilly's famous radar for spotting trends out in the future and say, not only are these going to be important, but how do actual businesses operationalize these trends? Okay? So normally in these talks, I'll just tell you very quickly, O'Reilly in Practice does offer executive briefings, so briefings to senior managers about trends and technology and how it's impacting business, innovation labs, which are run internal inside of companies to help employees kind of lead innovation inside of their organizations, public seminars, and strategic consulting. So I usually start with a big picture, and here it is rendering on your screen slowly, kind of pixelating and coming together. And when I'm in front of the room, I usually ask people what they think we're looking at, and I get everything from we're looking at a neural network to deep space to something from Star Trek. And as it does render in, what we're looking at is actually the Internet. It's a visualization of all of the servers that are online and the traffic that's coming there, the links that are being forged between these. So you see these bright hubs of traffic and conversation and all of the linkages that they have with one another. So it's this kind of ongoing living entity that really does represent a neural network of sorts. And I want to give you a couple of statistics. And just like looking at kind of the night sky, you can tend to kind of be overwhelmed by it, but not really think about the significance. And I want to kind of drill into the significance in just a moment. There's about 1.4 billion people like you and I interconnected together online. It's growing by about 100 million every 6 weeks. About 70,000 blog posts from average users per day are being posted, and that number's growing. About 68,000 videos uploaded to YouTube every day and growing. There's about 550,000 people sign up to one of the 2 major social networks every day. And as you look at this thing that's being shaped by the participation of these 1.4 billion people, the common response is, why does that matter for business? The common response is obviously because it's the largest single marketplace in history, and you have access to almost basically every single person on it instantaneously. And that's very true. But what I want to focus on today is the fact that this participatory web, this web that allows users to generate content and submit it via blogs, videos, comments, ratings, and reviews, that participatory web is fundamentally changing how we need to do business, because participation in the medium is actually changing behavior and expectations. And I mean behavior and expectations for customers, employees, stakeholders, everyone. It's got a culture embedded in this network, and we have to start understanding what are the operating rules inside of that culture. One example, a recent Ad Age poll found that 65% of customers would rather hear from a total stranger than a company about its products and services, meaning they no longer want to talk to the company. They want direct access to the company's customers to hear how they think about the service, etc. If you think about that, that's a very profound statement. Customers now expect to hear from others about your products and services. They expect you to know them, they expect choice, and they expect a voice. They expect to be able to have a say. So as we're going to show, this shift in power from company to customers has some direct implications on our organizing principles and our operating values. But first, how do we stop it? So one of the things that we in practice do is we collect a lot of good quotes when we're out in the field doing consulting, and this is one of my favorites. How do we stop it? I hear a lot of different variations on this same comment. And this story directly is pulled from a senior director of human resources at a company that has about 60,000 employees. And during the conversation about some of these trends, she said, none of my employees are on social networks. They don't do that. They don't exhibit that behavior. And let me just say, this is a retail group that has fairly young employees. So we found this kind of stunning that she thought that none of her employees were on social networks at all. So we were obviously in a room with an internet connection. So we went to Facebook, and let's just call her company Robot for a minute. I'm not going to tell you the company name. So we said, really, let's look it up. So we went to Facebook and just typed in her company name. Let's say just Robot sucks. We just put the word sucks next to it. There were 16 groups that showed up that were all composed of her employees that were saying, working at Robot sucks. Right? There were hundreds of people inside these groups. And her first response is, oh my God, how do I shut this down? How do I stop it? Right? And, I think in telling this story, it sounds funny or we kind of think, well, that's someone who doesn't quite get it. But the number of people that actually react this way and say, wait, how do I stop this? How do I shut this down? It's still remarkable how many people have that response. Here's another example. The AP asserts tough and still secret view of copyright on blogs. They recently sued a blogger for quoting a headline inside of his blog. And so this is going on to this day. What's deeply ironic about this instance is that AP routinely quotes long passages from the blogosphere, but somehow has avoided being sued. But the point about this is obviously we don't stop it. And yet there are a lot of business responses that are very knee-jerk about just engage legal or shut this down, or we cannot let our customers talk to each other. And so a lot of these are leading to some bad business decisions. such as, I would say, the AP asserting tough and still secret view of copyright on blogs and suing bloggers. So if that's the case, then really what I want to talk about is how do we rethink a few things, and particularly how do we rethink how we organize to do business on the social web as companies, and fundamentally, how do we relate and engage with our customers in a new way, and what does that take? Okay, so the first one is the new organizing principles, and I have many of these that I keep as far as organizing principles. I want to talk about three today. Particularly, I want to talk about listening beats talking, and I'm waiting for it to render. Relationships beat transactions, and open beats closed. So I want to talk about listening, being in relationship, and being open. So first, listening beats talking. Most companies, in fact, almost every company I've ever consulted to, is completely driven to talk. They're organized to talk. They're funded to talk. Marketing, PR, events, trade shows, these are all talking arms of a company. And they're well-funded, and they're meant to go push their message out to the market. And the kind of listening apparatus for companies usually is consumer insight, and it's usually a smaller group. They're engaged in research that takes a long time to produce. It's valuable, but it's the latency. In other words, it takes sometimes 12 months to get a really, really deep, detailed report or profile. At the very least, it takes months to go out and organize focus groups and go through the results, etc. So they're more tilted. Companies are more tilted towards talking than listening, and their listening apparatus is pretty primitive. And yet, listening delivers products and services better, cheaper, and faster. And let me talk about a couple of instances of this. Here's just one recent example that is part of a big trend online. Fox creates an online community for viewers. So here Fox is pairing with social networking service Passenger to launch a private online community, giving the network access to ongoing audience feedback on programming and marketing efforts. Right? So a lot of companies are now realizing the power of not just open communities for anyone to join, but certain communities made up of lead users that might give valuable intelligence back to the company in real time or near real time. So that's one piece of the trend. The other that I'd like to just give you a single example of here that's more recent, or actually as recent, and My Starbucks Idea. It's at mystarbucksidea.com, and I would actually urge you, if you haven't been there, to go there and look at how they're doing this. When I first heard about this, it was the first 2 weeks after this had launched, and a friend sent this to me and said, here's something that you'd be interested in. This is kind of in line with what you're talking about. And my first response, and I don't mean to offend any Starbucks lovers, but my first response was, first of all, I don't like Starbucks, by the way. My first response was, oh my God, this will never work. They don't get it. They just need to make a good cup of coffee and stop selling junk food. And they've lost their brand, and they lost what it's all about. But I went here anyway to look at what they're doing. And very quickly, I was struck by how profound a lot of the conversation actually was. Right here you can see recycling cold cups, bins, and education under social responsibility. At the time I took this screenshot was the number one issue there. But when I first went there, the number one issue that had 80,000 points or votes was all about creating cafe culture, again, in Starbucks. So there were some pretty deep ideas, and I want to also just show what Starbucks is really doing right here, because it illustrates. You see on the top bar, it's share your idea. So obviously they're opening this up for everyone to look at, share an idea that they have, view all the ideas. So these ideas can be in community. You can comment on these ideas. And in fact, the commentary is often really, really fascinating. So there were over 900 comments to the cafe culture idea. So there was a running commentary and dialogue between customers about amplifying the idea, kind of refining the idea, etc. Then you see the next one says ideas in action. So Starbucks is not only kind of letting customers speak to one another and promote ideas, they're also taking action on those ideas. And so this gets to what I mean by listening. There are two kinds of listening. There's passive listening, which is I'm just going to hear what people are saying, and that's important. It's a prerequisite to kind of doing business on the network is learning how to listen to the conversation that's taking place out there about your brand or your company. But the second piece is that if you want to open up a direct channel to allow customers to speak, it implies action. So being prepared to take action when we consult with companies about doing this, about opening a listening channel, it really is about how are you organized to not only listen, but then actually engage and take action on it. So it's a very rich word in terms of what it means for customers to do. The other case study I'll give you very quickly is Salesforce has a great, they have an idea exchange like Starbucks here, but because they're a product-based company, it really allows their customers to vote features within the product up or down that they would like to see. And just doing that has doubled the cycle time, the time that it takes for Salesforce to release a new version of software, because they can get direct customer feedback on new features they'd like to see, and they don't even need to say, well, is that a valuable feature or not, because their customers will tell them if it's valuable or not by voting for it. So it's a really powerful proposition to start reaching out and creating idea exchange. Next one is relationships beat transactions. Similar to listening, transactions tend to be measurable, and relationships are harder to measure. So companies are better at transactions than they are building relationships, right? And the money and time spent on relationship building is usually disproportionately small in a company. If you look at the pay scales in a company, it tells you that the call center isn't exactly the highest valued place to be in the company, yet it is the most direct point of contact with the most amount of customers, generally speaking. But why is relationship important? Building and sustaining relationships insulates a company from other forms of competition. One of the things we hear a lot when you go back to that picture of the internet that I showed you is, my God, in an always-on marketplace like this, I can no longer support being the low-price leader or things like that. Certain claims to value start to erode for companies. And so companies are now needing to look at a different way to insulate themselves from competition, because if it's just the low-priced leader, et cetera, that's going to be a hard claim to support when you have infinite variety of choices online. So companies increasingly are turning to ways of building and sustaining relationships that will insulate them from forms of competition. And that's one point that we really like to work on with companies in terms of their strategy is how do we build emotional loyalty rather than rational loyalty. Rational loyalty is price or efficiency. Emotional loyalty is much longer lived and higher benefit. So I could have chosen a lot of examples here. One that I thought about choosing, Zappos. Zappos is famous for their customer service. They're famous for paying new recruits $1,000 if they choose to leave after orientation, because they only want the best people that are really motivated to deliver customer service. And that's a form of relationship and word-of-mouth marketing that is incredibly powerful when you deliver profound customer service. I chose, however, mybarackobama.com, the social network. So I think there's some interesting things that they're doing in terms of building relationships. And it's very much, I think, aligned with kind of the internet phenomenon. Obviously, they've got about nearly now 2 million small donors that are contributing to the campaign, and they're contributing largely through mybarackobama.com, which is a really powerful social network that reaches out, engages you. There's a lot of messaging that goes on, and it takes it one step further. So I've got here, you see the dashboard, my neighborhood. It starts to build local communities of interest around that relationship with Barack Obama. So it's not just about this one-to-many communication from Obama to people, but then the social network within there. So you see friends, events. A lot of these events are local. When I joined this to tool around, I immediately, within 20 minutes, got some invitations from people in my neighborhood that were interested in doing things and organizing. So this is not a political statement. It's just a way of looking at how are some people doing things very much aligned with the way that the network operates. So relationships beat transactions. Next is open beats closed. So as this renders in, organizational boundaries are becoming more permeable, and workforce exists outside of your workplace. So when you look at this shift in power towards customers, one of the implications is as you start creating strategies to address that, to allow customers to speak to one another, to build either communities or social networks or go out and join the conversation in a new way, it imposes upon the organization a requirement to organize itself around that customer. And traditionally, marketing does marketing and customer service does customer service. A lot of these initiatives become very blurry about who's going to be responsible for this. If we're listening, who's responsible for listening, and then who's responsible for taking action? Those were normally completely separate arms of the company. How do they start to work together? So these boundaries are becoming a little bit more permeable. And additionally, then, workforce exists outside of your workplace is this idea that obviously more talent exists outside of your company than inside. And in the past, that was always true, but companies looked to build up their human capital inside that could push products and services to the outside world. And that idea is shifting a lot. Because with the internet, we're seeing a lot of companies that are able to tap into the innovation and talent of people outside their organization and bring that in. So, for example, Procter & Gamble, I think 35% of their products now are innovated outside of Procter & Gamble employees. Right? They engage other people in what's called open innovation. The example that I have here is Oh My News, which is fascinating. It's a South Korean newspaper that has 35,000 citizen journalists. So these are people that contribute articles. Ostensibly, they contribute them at no cost to Oh My. But as they're read, Oh My has a method of remunerating them for the success of the article, how well it does. Additionally, they allow readers to pay citizen journalists if they feel motivated to do so. And one school of thought would say that would never work. But in fact, it does work. And kind of one big success story is a particular philosophy professor contributed an article that did very well on the site and got a flood of small donations from readers, totaling $24,000 for a single article. So this kind of new way of looking at, well, how do I engage people outside of my workplace in a meaningful way and create a structure where I'm not saying get bunches of people to work for free, but how do you tap into the creative talents? The example above that we used about Starbucks, people aren't being paid, but they actually have a stake in improving a service that they use. So that often is a form of reward if they can have their voice be heard and that the company will take action on it. So let me move very quickly then from those three. Listening beats talking, relationships beat transactions, and open beats closed. So, if our organizations are structured as they typically are, hierarchically with these top-down communication systems, if we look at innovation being conceived on the inside and pushed outside, if we have large groups devoted to talking and not listening, and incentive structures that are devoted to kind of just transactions and sales, how do we hope to kind of do business on a network that privileges these other skills like being in relationship, listening, and kind of an open model of doing business? So that gets to new operating values that I feel are very important to instill inside a business. And let me quickly just draw a distinction between what I would call core values and operating values. Almost every company, hopefully, has core values, meaning these are values that don't change regardless of time or business context. These are things like fairness, integrity, things like that. That's kind of a company saying no matter where the wind's blowing, this is where I stand. Those are core values. Operating values are more like saying, hey, if we're opening up a new business in Europe or in the United States, we need to recognize kind of some of the cultural and context-based factors of doing business there. And there are operating values inside of that culture that we need to understand. The Internet, if I leave you with one punchline today, is it has its own culture. And it's a fairly open, democratic culture that promotes conversation. And so operating values need to kind of align with that culture. And here are the four that I think are really important. The first is listening. The next one is openness. Next one is ongoing inquiry. And the next one's participation. And I'm going to move through these fairly quickly, leave you with a couple of questions, and then open it up to your questions. So listening, as we discussed before, on the network, listening is a prerequisite to learning. It's the beginning of everything that we do. So obviously, before you want to start engaging anyone, it's good to get a gauge of what's going on out there in terms of what's happening inside of the Internet. I'm not sure if anyone's seen Chrysler's new ad. They're running it all over the television. It's called Chrysler Listens, where they send a vehicle down the road, but it's only just a chassis. It's just a frame of the vehicle. And as it moves down the road, different people join it and add a door or a window or a screen or something, a bumper. And the car is basically built by customers or people on the road as it drives down. And it ends with, look, we've added 300 features by listening to you, or Chrysler listens, right? And what the company is saying with that ad is the whole company is attuned to the customer, and that listening is an operating value for Chrysler. Openness. If you think of the word open, it's rich with positive meaning. Tolerant, candid, flexibility, things like that come to mind. So open refers to new views on collaborating across traditional boundaries. And it's going back to the example of the Obama campaign. One of the things that they did was they gave away their voter lists. Traditionally, the voter list was the most precious commodity that a campaign had. But what this campaign realized was, hey, if we give it away, we can empower people inside the social network to use it, to make calls, to rally support, etc. So value had moved from hoarding this voter list as a commodity to saying, wait, the value's moved to sharing it, and it's changed. And traditionally, I think most people would have, if I'd gone to a campaign like maybe Hillary's and said, give away your voter list, the first reaction would have been, absolutely not, we can't do that. So kind of starting to have an openness to new ways of doing business and new ideas is really, really important. There are myriad examples of people kind of giving certain things away that used to be considered precious in order to get more value from the network. Ongoing inquiry. If you look at 100 million people joining this internet thing every 6 weeks, their participation in that network is changing the character and composition of that network. New innovations are coming more and more rapidly, and so the only constant is that this rate of change is going to increase. And with that, really the only success that companies can hope to have is the kind of persistence and substance of our questions rather than the accuracy of the answers that we come to rest on now and then. And companies generally are organized to seek answers and to say, well, when we find it, let's just do it and repeat it. Let's repeat that answer over and over and over. And we often find that that's where companies really fall down, is thinking that they could execute an old way of doing business on the network and that it would work. So this idea of ongoing inquiry and continually asking ourselves provocative questions. Are we playing at the edge of the market? Are we creating new ways to engage and retain our customers? What new skills do we need in our jobs? What new skills do we need as workers to tap the creative power of our whole organization, right? Those things inside of ongoing inquiry are incredibly powerful. So the last one is equally key, participation. As I've hit on over and over here, the internet has its own culture, and you don't go there without having some understanding of that culture. And participation is kind of that transformative element of really getting in and understanding what's happening inside the culture of the internet. I've done a lot of work also with virtual worlds like Second Life. And one of the prerequisites whenever we had someone saying, what should we do, let's get into this, was first go spend 5 hours there, minimum. Just go, you need to create an avatar, you need to go and blend into this world and see what's happening. Because a lack of understanding about that culture leads to a lot of bad decisions about what you do inside of it. So one of the things that we're trying to do as well is, whether it's as simple as just getting on social networks or understanding how a wiki operates, is providing really hands-on skills for executives to go in and start participating in this medium. Because without that participation, I think it leads to a lot of bad decision making. So those are the 4 that I wanted to do, and I want to leave you with a question for each one of these. And then I'm going to open it up to your questions. So obviously these all relate to kind of the loop, listening, openness, ongoing inquiry, and participation. So how are we listening to our customers, and is it delivering results? And rather than just being a question, I will get prescriptive. You should be, if you're at a company of any size, going to Technorati and typing in your company name and seeing what's going on in the blogosphere. You should go to Google Alerts and have it send you something anytime there's a new blog post about your company, to just read what's going on out there and what's happening. This is passive listening, but just, are we listening to our customers is a really important question. And as I said, most companies that I engage with that are sizable, the delay between when they engage a research project and deliver results is about 6 months. And that, to me, is not enough. So the question about, are we listening to our customers is, are we using the social web to listen in new ways? Are we clear on the source of our value? I could choose a lot of things for openness, but I chose this one. Like Obama giving away voter lists, there's other stories, like a great story in Wikinomics of Gold Corp, which was a mining company that could not find gold on its property. And instead of just they were nearing to shut down this particular operation, they could not find any gold there. The CEO released their geological survey data out to the public and said, look, I'll pay you $500,000 for the best ideas for how to find gold. They got hundreds of submissions completely outside of the field of geology. They got computer people, they had other types of engineers. They found $4 billion worth of gold from those responses. So again, workforce exists outside of your workplace. Think of it that way. And being open to where the source of value is. Traditionally, that geological survey data was precious and was something that was hidden. But on the network, you might be able to find value by giving something away. So really being clear on the source of your value, protecting that, but being willing to parlay other things, to have workforce outside of your workplace look at and add value to and innovate upon. So for ongoing inquiry, I have, what 4 key questions can I put to the entire organization to renew our approach to market? One of the things we do in our practice with clients is really look at questions like companies traditionally look at mission statements. They spend a lot of time figuring out mission statements, right? But very little time kind of saying, if I could ask 4 powerful questions every quarter, what would those 4 questions be? What would those questions be that would really challenge our organization? And so I would ask everyone to kind of look and write down, what are the key questions that you can write down that would be very provocative and generate insight? And finally, how do I allocate the appropriate time to participate on the social web? It's really important here because one of the things we do, we also look at job postings. We do O'Reilly does a lot of research with job postings and job data. And what's interesting about job descriptions is that they're shifting. I mean, it sounds fairly obvious, right? You would never hire a chief marketing officer now that had no understanding of social media. of social networks, blogs, communities, things like that. So everyone, I would tell you, whether you are a human resources manager who's charged with talent management and recruiting, whether you're in research and development and you're looking at ways that you are delivering on innovation and faster innovation, or whether you're in marketing and saying, look, people don't want to hear from me anymore, they want to hear from my customers, how do I empower that to happen? Regardless of who you are, that part of understanding the mechanics of the social web, of these tools and how they work, is a requirement. It's a job description now, and increasingly will become more and more of a job description. So the idea of how you allocate the appropriate time to participate is key, not only because it gives you the right skills, but also it allows you this window into the culture that's underlying the Internet. So those are the 4 key questions I wanted to leave you with, and I will open it up to any questions that we have. I apologize, it took a little bit longer to get through that than I thought, but we still have plenty of time for questions.
Hi, Josh.
Hi.
That was great. I thought that was fascinating. We do have some good questions, and one of them, I'm just going to start from the beginning as they came in, and one I think I've heard you answer before. It's how would you suggest approaching old school upper management about allocating the proper resources to Web 2.0?
Right, and this is a great question. One of the things that we do in our public seminars is try and arm people as evangelists, or create evangelists that can go in and start to tell that story. And there's a couple of key pieces to this. I think it really is about building a good story around this stuff. In other words, are there cases, typically with management, are there cases inside of their industry that will resonate with them about the impact of these changes? Because the first thing you need to do is make the case for change. Not just say, hey, we need to go do this, but say, look, the world is moving, and it's having an impact on our business, and here's how. And storytelling is the most effective way to do that. So, whether it's some of the examples I gave here, it's finding some relevant examples, and there are a lot of resources to do that, and moving that conversation up with and allying it with a lot of traditional business support. In other words, why should we do this? What's the case for it? What's the potential ROI, and what's the opportunity cost of not doing this? Are really key to bringing that up to upper management. The other piece that I would bolt onto that is that it is very good to start small. A lot of times in larger companies, you probably already have people doing like Web 2.0 or social web initiatives that are under the radar. And I always encourage people to go dig around and find some of those, because often there's a success story inside your own organization already that you can look at and nurture and put forward. But I think starting small is key, and also building an effective case, because a lot of times I see a lot of enthusiasts, but there's not a lot of business support that resonates with upper management, because upper management's issues are, they're overwhelmed already with the amount of tasks day to day and quarter to quarter that they need to manage. So getting this on their radar requires a fairly compelling case for change and some storytelling and business rationale.
Okay. Our next question, I think, is along the same lines. Someone is asking, I'm particularly interested in learning how to socialize Web 2.0 principles throughout the organization. And then a
That's
second
huge.
part. Right. And then the person also said, talk more about listening, not the idea, but how to present and enforce those ideas to marketing, and give some examples. So.
Okay. I'll take those, I guess, in order. So I think that socialization is really a key piece of that, because in part of the public seminars we do, we really feel like because a lot of the changes and the changes that I alluded to are cultural in nature, they're about people, they're not about technology, that it requires a certain amount of socializing to get everyone on board with that. So this, I guess, relates back to the first one, which is, I think creating evangelists inside the organization that start to socialize that is really important with One of the things that we do is we start giving people some very basic skills to start tracking what's going on the social web. So like how, building collectors for, RSS feeds that they can get that start to give them really, really good data on what's going on out there, what case studies and stories are taking place, and helping them start to move that. We run, obviously, the innovation labs that we run. I'm not trying to pitch our services, but that's one of the aims of the innovation labs that we run inside of companies, is to get people not only socialized, but starting to actively turn some of these concepts over in their mind and apply them inside of the business. How would I use some of these tools to address existing business challenges, get closer to customers, innovate a product or a service more quickly? So I think it's twofold. I think one, really starting to track and monitor what's going on out there and bring it into your organization. Small pilots I've seen work. In other words, sometimes with clients what I'll do is I will actually run a project with social media tools. In other words, say instead of your typical project management software, we're going to use a wiki for this with some basic blogging capability, and just work it with a very small group and start to socialize how powerful that can be instead of using email to kind of collaborate on a project, and start it very small like that to socialize it with a particular group. The second question was?
It was, let's see, about listening. Not the idea, but how to present and enforce those ideas to marketing. Please give us some examples.
How to present and enforce those ideas. I'm thinking about if I understand the question. How to present. Well, I think the first piece gets to, if I understand the question about present and enforce, and to marketing specifically. Typically, I think the way that we've done it is, there's a lot of research data. I quoted one from Ad Age, which is 65% of people don't want to hear from the company. They'd rather hear from a complete third party. Also in direct experience that we've had about like reviews and recommendations and about trust from customers, they don't want to hear from the company at all. It's reinforced over and over. And so within marketing, the idea of how do we start to deliver, create some listening devices is really important. But in terms of presenting, I think it gets back to the first question. Case studies of people that have taken a different approach to listening. So what I would say is look at Dell's Idea Storm for their products and services. Look at Starbucks. Look at Salesforce with Idea Exchange, and there's myriad others that you can go to in terms of communities that are based upon listening, and listening is a different way of empowering marketing to speak to customers. But I think that's present. Enforce, I think, is a harder bit. I don't know that. I'm not sure that I think if there's not a will there to do that, and unless you start to deliver results from it, it's really hard to do any type of enforcement. So it gets back again to this idea of, is there a way that we can run some pilot project and start building a listening device out there? And the first thing I would say to this person as well is the very first piece we do, I distinguish between active and passive listening. I start with passive listening always, which is, okay, here's 5 things you can do. You need to basically start programming Google alerts to go out and tell you anytime someone's mentioned you on the blogosphere. Go onto social networks and type in your company name and find out if people are already organized around your company and services, and start just listening to that general sense of the conversation. I have one client from a really large retailer that just started doing that and was able to pull together a really fascinating presentation for their boss inside of marketing and say, hey, look, there is a whole world of conversation out there that we are not engaged in at all, and it's part of a really dynamic new group of people that we didn't even think was in our buying group. In other words, they thought their target group was average age 45, which they are. But in terms of listening and who was talking out there, they were able to start, and they are in the process of doing this right now, developing a program to engage a whole different type of user that is actually actively discussing their brand online, but is basically aged roughly 25 to 30.
Wow.
So that's the listing piece.
Here's another good question. If you open up communications, don't you risk eroding your brand and your promise?
That's a great question. I think it's a different kind of balancing act than it was before. And brand, I guess the idea of branding is moving because in a lot of ways, brand was mostly about what you said about yourself, how you kind of put your message out to the world. And yet, what we're seeing is that in this kind of interconnected environment, your brand really starts to become more about the way customers experience you and start talking about you. You look at a company like Comcast, which has like several million people have viewed this YouTube posting of a Comcast worker falling asleep on the job while on hold with Comcast, and the damage that it did to their brand. And they turn around and create this ad called Comcasting and spend millions of dollars to counter this impression that's now circulating on the social web that their service is terrible. So I think it's now a much more of a dance about saying, look, our customers are going to talk about us regardless of whether we're inside of that flow of conversation or not. So we need to still stay strong to understanding what our brand promise is, what we stand for, and what we're about. But in a sense, the social web holds you accountable to that. And if you deviate from it, it's actually more dangerous, right? I mean, Comcast with its Comcastic campaign looks more ridiculous now with that promise being so far out of whack with what we're seeing people posting on YouTube about them. So I think it doesn't erode brand promise if your company is able to, again, listen to what's going on out there, be responsive to what's going on out there, and actually use that listening as an active feedback channel to improve. But it's definitely changed the model. Companies have to be far more responsive to customer commentary than they did before because they can't hide it.
Okay, good answer. Here's one. How do you address security concerns? There's a lot of fear around hacking into open source, etc. IT seems to prefer a closed SharePoint environment.
I think that's a great question. Normally, what companies do is obviously in response to security, which is a really, really important, and I would add a couple more to those, by the way. It's security. There's also certain industries like financial services have regulation or healthcare. They have other types of considerations as well around security, but also privacy or government regulation and things like that. So not everyone is going to move in lockstep towards this. I think the big key there that I've seen be very effective is to really denote what is mission critical for security and what isn't really mission critical, because a lot of times in big organizations, particularly what I've seen is that IT comes out in and says, well, basically anything that is being transmitted over this, over the network has to be under the same type of security protocol. And that really stifles a lot of being able to be dynamic and responsive, and usually there's a way to kind of look and say, well, wait, what is mission critical, and how do we lock that down and be really, really ultra secure on that? But opening a channel like a blog or opening something else to a customer should be much more dynamic and responsive. And are we able to use some lightweight tools over here? Typically, if there's will at a senior level, that's not a hard exercise once you actually get people to sit down at the table and draw a boundary line about what's critical and what's not.
Now, here's a question, and the person says it's coming out of left field. As a writer of children's fiction, how do you suggest I use these concepts to make contact with publishers?
That's interesting.
Well,
it's interesting. That gets to a whole different kind of way of marketing. I have a friend who just wrote a book and is releasing it chapter by chapter online and trying to build kind of some, her premise is, if I can prove readership and volume here, I can basically get a publishing contract through having already reached out through the social web and marketing the book myself to kind of prove that I have an audience and that the book is saleable. And there are a lot of other resources that allow you to kind of start doing that. But that would be, I think, a little bit different than the concepts we've talked about here. I would say that engages openness. In other words, saying, is it the content of your book that's could you release pieces of that book and get more value by doing so than kind of waiting with it? So maybe creating teasers and releasing some of your content out into the market, I think would be great. And I think then you get into a whole other arena of kind of how do you start doing online marketing. It's a little outside the scope of today's conversation, but we could talk about, if you want to reach me by the next Q&A slide that I presented, I'd be happy to kind of continue that one offline.
Okay. We have another. Do you have time for another question?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, okay. One person was asking for additional examples of how companies give things away and then profit.
Right. I gave a couple of interesting examples about, voter lists. That traditionally I was really interested in things that were quote unquote sacred, like the voter list or the geological survey data. But there's a lot of more kind of common examples of companies looking at the data that they have, let's say around customer service and problems or issues with their product, and being able to kind of release that out into the market for people to build upon. So there's a lot of kind of that inside of these support communities that are going on. That's releasing a piece of information that isn't exactly precious, but it was something that they considered to be inside and not of much value. It was just kind of their knowledge base for customer service. They used it for customer service. A lot of companies are now putting that out onto the marketplace and saying, look, let's have our customers build upon that. Let's keep it updated by having them support each other in that process. And that's been, obviously, it's an enormous amount of value. So there's kind of more examples of that in terms of just companies that are looking inside at things that are non-obvious or not precious and just saying, what will we get if we let that go? The other piece of this, which is, if you look at these idea exchanges, in a sense what they are doing is they're not taking IP, but they're basically giving over a certain responsibility and saying, look, we're going to open up this conversation to you. And they have their product managers. If you look at like Starbucks or Salesforce, they have their product managers online in that conversation, that they're talking about what's coming up, where the product roadmap is going. They're giving up something there in terms of what was, that product roadmap was typically considered really, something you didn't release out to the market at all. But they're realizing if we give this up, we can have customers amplify and build upon it, and we get a lot more value from that process than we did otherwise.
Okay. Let's see. There are a couple other questions. One, I think it's the same person who asked before about how presenting and enforcing those ideas to marketing, and he's clarifying it by saying, what I mean is that marketers are trained to talk. How do you train them to shut up and listen?
Right. That's really interesting. So one of the things we do in our courses is we run through something called the 7 deadly sins, which is the sins that traditional businesses commit without even really thinking. And I think, this person gets really down to a real point about what's in the DNA of marketing is traditionally kind of like just talk. And actually, I would also build on that is to usually stifle conversation because it's not on message, right? That's going to dilute our, brand, or we're not going to, we let people talk and then, it gets out of control. So I guess one of the things we do is then we actually run through some pretty interesting physical exercises, which I can't describe to you over here, but to show people how kind of their mindset as marketers may cause them to make bad business decisions, and that actually talking alone is a bad business decision. inside of the marketplace now, and to really kind of have them almost physically get that they make decisions without really thinking about this new environment. And what we're hoping to do is kind of short circuit that bad decision making. You look at the example I gave earlier of AP just suing a blogger. I don't think that was a very well thought out intentional decision. It was kind of it was an institutionalized reaction. They said, look, we have copyright laws, legal saw some infringement, legal goes after it. People are like, well, that's legal, those are our policies, we go do it. So I think it's about kind of short circuiting those impulses. And with marketing, a lot of the work we do is with people in marketing, and we walk through bad business decisions. We illustrate people that have made really dumb decisions. And there's so many stories about this that I'm not going to go in and tell a bunch of stories, but I think, A, it's storytelling. B, it's walking them through some of these like kind of almost more physical exercises I've said that literally illustrate in a different way how they have mental models of the way the world works that are getting in the way of their business decisions. And the two of those combined hopefully are powerful. And then the third is to start exploring actually listening and seeing what's going on there, which can be very revealing for them in terms of business intelligence that it reveals. So kind of those three things put together hopefully has an impact on marketing.
Okay. It's 10:58. There's one more quick question. Are you out of time?
Sure. No, that's fine.
Okay. All right. One person is asking, let me see if I can find it. He asked it in three parts. Can you talk to us about the types of initiatives for internal use to connect employees with management? And then he adds, be it with blogs, wikis, intranets, and how these internal initiatives, the similarities they would have with external.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of, let's start backwards, I think there's a lot of similarities with external in that I think generally speaking companies tend to want to structure the flow of communication really tightly. They don't like conversation getting out of hand, and they don't like I think they're as concerned about diluting their brand with their employees or, as they are with customers, or maybe not quite, but, they don't like that idea, or it's a scary idea to let that kind of conversation organically grow or move around. And it also moves outside of the domain of the way that they're traditionally organized. It runs across marketing, perhaps, and customer service and R&D and things like that. So I think that it's the same set of concerns that companies need to address. But I think that the differences, actually they're very similar in that way that I think, one of the first things we like to do is really understand what the objectives of the project are. It's not just about deploying social media for social media's sake. It's about saying, do you have a specific goal in mind? In other words, are you looking to ramp up time for innovation? In other words, you want more market leadership, you want to release products more quickly or lead the market with products and services, or you're looking to get closer to your customers or employees. Maybe, for an internal initiative, an HR person is saying, look, I really want to start tapping into having our employees manage their own career path more actively, and that's my goal. So the first thing is really staying clear on objectives without just getting enchanted by social media itself. The second piece is to look at who these people are that you're trying to reach and understanding how alien is some of this stuff going to be for them. I mean, if you have a group of employees that are so-called digital natives that are using tools like this all the time, well, then you might have a lot more latitude to go out with something a little bit more sophisticated. If not, I prefer to keep it really, really simple. And in fact, I rarely have advocated wikis because they're harder to get up and going. They're harder to motivate people to engage in, etc. And I think that just being very clear about who that target audience is and aligning that with objectives is really important. I think I had one more piece to it, but I lost it as I was moving along.
That happens to me too. No, that's great. I think we better wrap it up. But I wanted to say on the matter of giving things away, someone's asked if you'll make your slides available. Do you post them to SlideShare or any of those sites?
I can absolutely. I can absolutely do that. I love
hope
to do
so
that.
too, because I've taken a
I
lot of
wanted to
notes.
say, if anyone wants to kind of reach out to me directly, the funny thing about webcasts is that getting a question in writing is sometimes hard to apprehend exactly what the motivating force is behind it. Like if you have a specific business issue and then there's a context there, and feel free to reach out to us, and I'll do my best to answer any questions directly via email. So feel free to do that, because I always like hearing. I like actually hearing what's going on and what kinds of issues and challenges people are having across the board. So
great. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Josh. It was a wonderful presentation. So
my pleasure.
And
we'll work on a
what?
sequel. We'll work
That's
on
right.
a sequel.
That's right.